In 2017, on the 5th anniversary of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, I led members of my congregation in protest outside the National Sports Shooting Foundation, which in a cruel irony is also located in Newtown. About 30 of us stood on the road opposite their shiny new building with signs and chants for gun safety. The police were there, they were present, but they were not taking any action. And then we noticed on the other side of the road, directly in front of the building, counter-protesters gathering directly across from us, shouting slogans for guns rights. Insults were hurled across the road at one another, until I had the idea to say, hey, why are we on this side of the road? Let's go over there. Let me say that my people didn't exactly jump at the chance. After all, some of the men, and they were predominantly men, white men, looking tough and openly carrying sidearms, a few of us weren't so sure about going over to the other side of the road. But as time went by, more and more of us went over there, and we started to mingle with the gun rights people. A little tense, to say the least. The police got out of their cars and flanked the protest on either side. But after about 10 minutes, something remarkable happened. Our people, without any prompting from me, started to ask the individuals who supported gun rights why they supported gun rights. And what they heard over and over again was that they were afraid for their families, that the world was a scary place and they wanted to have some control, some sense of safety. They wanted to keep their families safe. That was the predominant response. One of our people, normally a very feisty mother of 3, said, well, we want to keep our kids safe too, but at least we have that in common. It continued to be remarkable. People on either side of this terrible issue actually talking with one another, not shouting for the most part, but talking with one another. And my favorite moment came when an older British member of my congregation asked a young man with a gun why he was protesting. He said, because politicians lie about who we are. My congregant took a long, slow look at this man towering over her. She was a little lady about this tall. And she said in her best British accent, young man, all politicians lie. And with that, they broke out laughing. Last week, I spoke to you about the path of curiosity. I talked about why it's so important to ask questions and avoid prejudiced answers. I talked about how important knowledge is to the path of curiosity, that we need the knowledge in order to ask the right questions. But this week, I want to talk a little bit more about the moral dimensions of curiosity. And specifically, I want us to examine how premature judgment can literally kill other people. And it certainly stalls curiosity. My idea for this sermon came from the show Ted Lasso. Anybody know Ted Lasso? Yeah. Ted, a former American football coach with this southern drawl and a folk wisdom that still amazes me when I watch it, had been hired by an English soccer team owner to coach her team. The owner of the club, Rebecca, has in her divorce agreement received the team. And now she is in a pub with her very conceited and very wealthy ex-husband, Rupert. In this scene, Rupert has challenged Ted to a game of darts. Now, Rupert has a very high score, and he's gloating at Ted, sure that Ted is going to lose. But let's see what happens. Let's watch the clip. So now, I'd like you to turn to your neighbor, and I'd like you to answer the question as best you can. When have you been surprised by curiosity? When has your judgment been turned over because of something you didn't know? When were you surprised by curiosity? Let's take a few minutes to chat about that, shall we? Well, it's a good thing you had nothing to say, I'll tell you. We ushers have got mics, so I'd like to see if we can get some responses. If you'd like to just raise your hand, the usher will hold the mic and you can speak into it. Let's hear from some of you. What sort of things came up? Down here?
I thought it was great.
Yeah. Okay, we talked about stereotypes and how it's a shorthand and easy, but usually wrong.
Thank you. Good. Kathy over there.
Yeah, I can get it. That's good. So the curiosity happened right here. We introduced ourselves to each other, and she's from Lexington, Massachusetts, and I lived in Bedford for 47 years, right next door. And voila, we had curiosity.
Thank you. Anyone else?
That reminded me of an experience that I had right here. One of the earlier times that I was here for a service and sat next to an individual, and Reverend John had another one of his projects of involving the congregation in an activity. Turn to your neighbor and see what they do, see what they're about. So we turned to each other and said, hello, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so. Oh, and what do you do? Oh, I'm a musician. Oh, the other person, oh, I'm a musician. Oh, what do you play? Oh, violin. Oh, I play violin. Since then, we've struck a very nice friendship. So that person was a visitor. She's not a member now, but we have connected and stayed connected.
That's great. Our music director plays violin, too. What a coincidence. Yes, one more.
Hi. This may sound a little silly, but I came to this church at the invitation of a friend who was going to the folk sings that were happening every week. So I liked it, and I went back weeks, months, and all of a sudden one day, Carl Sweben, who coordinated this group, he said, by the way, everybody, this Sunday we're going to be singing at church. I was very curious, and I said, what church? Nobody had ever mentioned that this was church-related. I came, and I was, of course, so impressed and happy that I found it. But it was my curiosity, like not in a long-distance way, but just on the moment. And I wanted to share that.
Thank you. Thank you. One more? Okay.
One more. I have a habit of being curious. I like to know how everything works. So I would be surprised if I wasn't curious about something.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you. Our lack of icons is sometimes confusing to people. They don't realize we're actually a church. One congregation I served, they used to have a very burgeoning singles program. In fact, it was so big that they couldn't really manage it inside the church. It was several hundred people on a Thursday night. And the minister at that time showed up, and he walks into the narthex to the lobby area, and someone comes up to him and goes, what are you doing here? Well, he said, what do you mean? He said, well, you have a wedding ring on. This is a singles thing. And he goes, well, I'm actually the minister of the church. And she said, this is a church? What we've discovered, of course, is judgment can be a trap, right? Judgment relies on certainty and ego, and most of the time when we're passing judgment on somebody, we're passing judgment because we'd like to be secure in our own self. When we judge, we already feel like we know enough and we can write the other person off. And too often in our conversations, we all do this. In our conversations, when we're talking to somebody, we're really thinking about where we're going to go with them, with whatever they said, and now it's about me. I spent my life trying to turn that off. It's not easy to do. And I know that I will, if I do not know the whole story, often miss the nuance that comes with judgment. As my good friend and colleague David Miller said in a book that we're actually working on together, he said, in the absence of clarity, people will fill in their own meaning and context. In other words, we tend to judge without all the facts before us or without all the understandings of what those positions are. This prejudice is the pitted ground on which we stand when we assume people are inferior or wrong or just plain stupid. And judgment then is that sordid soil from which grows racism, homophobia, classism, sexism, ageism. The cure for this is less judgment and more curiosity. In honoring our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all, it means we need to understand who the other person is, and I mean the whole person. Curiosity before judgment embraces also our fourth principle, which is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. How we interact with our peers and with one another and with people who are very different than us says a lot about who we are as people. At the heart of curiosity are the very values we espouse as you use. Prejudice, turns out, shortchanges justice. Because when we conclude our actions before understanding the problem, we're not able to understand what justice actually means. Prejudice works against pluralism because it makes an us versus them scenario. There are those who are in and those who are out. It works against interconnection. It burns or severs the ties which bind us. And without curiosity, we cannot see what we have in common, and therefore we're not able to live in a spirit of equity. And I have found that the generosity of spirit and treasure is cast off when we are not curious, when we don't understand what it is we're trying to do, when others are trying to explain that to us, and that leads to a hard-heartedness and a culture of scarcity. And finally, I think prejudice leaves no room for transformation. If we're only going to believe what we have judged others to be true, we do not understand what transformation means, which is actually to do things differently. Curiosity means we love first and judge second. Can you hear me? There's a difference, though, between curiosity and agreement. When I'm in a difficult conversation, I try to ask clarifying questions. And I try to ask them over and over again. I talked about this a little bit last week. We know why 3 to 5-year-olds ask so many questions of why. They're trying to get to a certain foundation of understanding, a sort of existentialist understanding of themselves as persons emerging in the world. Well, it's no different for us at whatever age we are at. When we ask clarifying questions, we are actually diving into the understanding that makes curiosity such a great value for us. And I try to nod or repeat back what I'm hearing. Now, this was hard for me to do at first because I thought if I was doing that, I was agreeing with the other person. But in doing this, we're really trying to understand the other person. And we may, and I have often still openly disagreed with another person, but at least we have each heard each other. And I have found out that over the years, just being heard is sometimes enough to move on. Being curious doesn't mean you abandon your morals, or you agree with harmful behaviors, or you validate everything that comes to you. It means simply choosing to ask questions and to seek the why before you make a final moral verdict. It requires empathy. Actually. It requires understanding where the other person comes from. As the author Robert Begley once said, empathy is not agreement. Empathy is the doorway to being heard. Part of this practice is something known as ethical curiosity. You can't ask anyone just anything. You have to be careful about what you ask someone. One of the worst, I think, happens when people who come from different ethnic backgrounds in their life, they look differently than the sort of normative white person, right? And you walk up to them and you say, "Where are you from?" And they say, "Pasadena." "Where are you from?" If we are not careful about how we ask those questions, we can hurt other people. We can be asking out of mere intrigue, which is another name for gossip, or entitlement, because we feel like we can't ask those questions. Our curiosity needs to be aware of the boundaries and the decentering that we need to take on as mostly white, wealthy people towards the dignity of the other. The Latinx blogger, workshop leader, and activist Monica Guzman tells this story. As I packed up from one of my curiosity workshops last summer, a participant named Don came up to me. He was thrilled about what he had learned, but he was confused. He said, "You asked us to avoid judging each other so we could stay curious." But he said, "My judgments are what helps me stay curious." When he explained what he meant, it made total sense. He's sitting there during the workshop, during the exercise, listening to his partner lay out her opinion on gun regulations. And a judgment pops into Don's head. She must hate the Second Amendment. But then he notices the judgment before he can poison the conversation, and he turns it into a question. Does she hate the Second Amendment? What would she say if I found a better way to ask this question? Listening to judgments instead of pushing them away helped Dawn stay curious and honest. Judgments about other people pop into our minds all the time. It is unavoidable. I understand this. If we want to check who we are, we need to be able to hint on questions that we could ask to clarify the other person's position. And as Monica Guzman said, the best way to unlock people's ability to listen is for you to listen to them. And then just recently on Instagram, she said, "There are a lot of people drowning here now. How can we help people undrown? We can save them with the life preserver of curiosity." She said, "Don't start with the issues, start with the relationship." Don't start with the issues, start with the relationship. Who is this person? What is in their heart? And what's holding them back? Now let's say, just for an instance, that you don't like how something looks around here. I don't know. Or you disagree with a particular issue in our congregation, or your family, or at work, or in politics. Are you going to come in guns blazing and all righteous about what you don't like? Or are you going to honor the other and ask, why is this the way it is? So I'd start there, friends. I'd keep the guns out of it, like the sign says. The sign. No guns allowed here. I can't say hearts and minds were completely changed that cold day in Newtown, Connecticut. But I can say that the protests just melted away after about a half an hour. No one pulled out a gun. The police did not need to intervene. People stopped calling each other names. Something as simple as curiosity seemed to open the hearts of those whom we had disagreed with or may have even hated on the other side. So I say, more curiosity, less judgment. Can I get an amen? Amen.